teachers tonight is a fill-in. We had scheduled Tim Eager, and Tim would have been Sterling, but our fill-in is equally good historian. He hasn't been here as long as Tim was, but we'll appreciate him anyway. Any questions so far? Next week, current Jasper County politics, and Mayor Wood is here. You are mayor, aren't you?
Yeah. I hope so.
He's got his mouthpiece with him as long as I'm in good shape.
We'll break at the halfway point. Let's start with Mike, Attorney Mike Riley.
Well, talking about, and I apologize to some of you that were here last week. You thought I spoke last week on the Kennedy campaign, something I was much more knowledgeable about than the topic tonight, which is we're supposed to talk about the history of Jasper County politics. And my Republican counterpart for some time, who will be the speaker next, Mr. Culp, has taught me a lot about Jasper County politics. I came here 15 years ago as a Democrat, moved here with my wife, who did not inform me that since the turn of the century, there's only been 2 Democrats elected county-wise that I know about. Maybe Kenny knows some others, but there was a sheriff, I think, in 1938 and a sheriff in 1974 that were Democrats that were elected, and then my wife was elected in 1990 as the Superior Court judge. And so from the turn of the century, if you have 3 county Jasper County Democrat office holders, obviously the Democrat Party doesn't have a lot of history in Jasper County. And part of that, I think, is due, or at least since I've been here, is due to the efforts and the good organization that Mr. Culp has been the leader of, and I've always admired him, resented it, but admired him for having a fine Republican organization. I would like to say that the Democrats had a history in Jasper County. But if you look at it from the 15 years that I have been here, and Tim Eager would have been a much more knowledgeable speaker, and much of the knowledge that I gained from Democrat politics in Jasper County was gained from Tim Eager. So if you're looking at it from a county level, that's about it. I think that when I moved here in 1980, I had always been active in Democrat Party politics in Marion County and in the state. And when I was here, I saw that the Democrat organization, mainly because of the fact that there had been so little success, was pretty downtrodden. And in 1984, at the encouragement of 2 of my good friends, Steve and Donna Wood, I ran for county chairman and was successful in being elected Democrat county chairman. In this county, that's not it's not a real important post, but in those years, we were able to get some very qualified candidates, and who were not successful, but at least we were out there giving the county a choice in the two-party system. And I believe in the two-party system. I think it's very important. I think the citizens of Jasper County benefit by having a two-party system and to have a strong two-party system, which we don't have here. I found out from some of my Republican friends that in Marion County and in Hamilton County, that other than Hamilton County, Jasper County is the strongest Republican county and has been for years. Sort of an interesting story in that I've always been a big fan of Evan Bayes. I worked for his father. I worked for him for Secretary of State. When he ran for governor the first time, I believe that he lost Jasper County by somewhere around 110, 112 votes. And 4 years later, he won every county but two. And one of those counties was Clinton County, which is the home of Lindley Pearson, the Republican candidate for governor, and the other county was Jasper County. So I was at a function at the governor's residence, and my wife was there, and there were a number of county chairmen and party officials from all over the state. And as I was talking to somebody or something, someone tapped me on the shoulder, and it was Susan Bye. And she says, Mike, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm here because you invited me. She goes, well, we made a mistake. We only invited county chairmen that won their county. And then pretty soon the governor came up and he reminded me of that. He suggested that maybe my wife should be county chairman. And I think the last time he lost by 107 votes. And my response to him, well, you know, you were at my house for a fundraiser and you must have pissed off 107 people. But it was done in jest, but yet in turn I know it was very important to the governor that he would have liked to have won every count. And hopefully in 1998, when he runs against Senator Coates, that can be done. I know Kenny won't like that, but that's what Governor Bye intends to do. And I think that will be a real interesting race. So we've just gone through the mayoralty election, and I would choose tonight to talk about some of our, if you're going to talk about many successes of the Democrat Party, I think that the history of Jasper County politics from a Democrat perspective is we get tired of talking about the losing campaigns, and we can talk about the mayoralty campaigns in Rensselaer. Although as you look at the voting records, if you look at the precinct records in Marion 5, or in Marion 1 through 5, which make up the precincts of the city of Rensselaer, in a county election, you will see that those precincts, with the exception of precinct 5, invariably go in the column of the Republican Party, except in the mayoralty elections. And in not all mayoralty elections, of course, but Tim Eager won what, Mayor? 3 terms as mayor. Were they 3 consecutive terms?
No, 1 term and then 2 consecutive.
Two consecutive terms. And Tim won, as I've read some of the newspapers and talked to some of the people, and of course heard Tim more sometimes than I really wanted to hear tell me about those political stories in his campaigns, is I think that Tim won the election like Mayor Wood won the election Tuesday. And that is by being a good office holder and trying to not be partisan politically during the course and term of his office, in doing what was he thought. Although, of course, anytime you're a leader, there's going to be a division of opinion. But what Tim thought during those times were the right course for us to take for our city. And he was successful, and as a Democrat, he was successful. And then, again, Roger Merriman was elected mayor, Democrat, and I think he had the same idea. Look, I'm a Democrat in what is considered a Republican area, and the only way that I can get elected is talk about not partisan politics, but what's good for the city. And he was elected. Then Bob Wilcox was elected for 2 terms. On his second term, history-wise, and it reminds me a lot of this election, in that I hope the outcome isn't the same, Mayor, as this election, or as that past election, but on election night of, when was that, 1987, we were at my law office, and the mayor, and again, my memory, as I get older, my memory's not as good, but the mayor was out there essentially by himself. I think we had some Democrat candidates, but we did not have a full ticket, and he won by 1 vote. And there was a lot of jubilation that election night. It was interesting in that I had been involved in recounts before, and so the recount process was started in 1987. Mayor Wilcox filed for recount because that might be coming up. Just to give you an idea of what you do on a recount is you file a complaint with one of the courts, or a petition for a recount with one of the courts, and then the ballots are impounded, and the court, each party select a recount commissioner, and then the court appoints the 3rd one. And then the lawyers in 1987, I think I know Jim Beaver represented Mayor Wilcox, and I represented Steve. And what you do is you go through the ballots to ascertain that they were counted correctly. What happened in that, much to our dismay, was the old voting machines, you know, that you push that lever over and close the curtain, and then you pulled down numbers. And in the back, there were counters, like they would count people going through an aisle. And evidently what happened is one of the machines was jarred, and Steve started out with 9 votes before the polls ever opened. If we could have just opened the polls for a minute, closed them, you would have been a 9-vote winner back then. And we went through that process, and then we went through the process of the absentee ballots, and I think that, as it turned out, that Steve lost by 4 votes. 3 or 4 votes. So the recount process is a lengthy process, and it's rather a technical process in that there's a lot of case law in Indiana as to what is a good ballot and what's a bad ballot. That was a very disappointing election for Steve, and obviously because I was his lawyer, I went in as a 1-vote victor. Our client that was a 1-vote victor and came out with a 3-vote loser. It didn't show much about my skill as a lawyer in counting ballots, but that's the process, and it was a fair process, and it was a democratic process, and a mistake was made, and it was just through human error. And much to Steve's credit, once he saw what had happened, is he didn't take the case to hearing. He just said, hey, I lost fair and square, and we went on about our business. 4 years ago, again, being involved in Steve's campaign 4 years ago, he won by 600 votes, approximately, as did the whole slate of the council candidates. This year, you know, it was another one of those squeakers, and I think it shows again that the city of Rensselaer, in its local elections, are going to vote for the people that are running, not necessarily the party. And with the exception of the Odom-Parkinson race, it was clear cut. 2 Democrats won by a large majority, Herb Hood and Lorraine Mitchell, and 2 Republicans won by a large majority, and that was Klinger and Williams. And so I think, I mean, it's obvious that there was a lot of vote splitting. One of the real funny things in this recent election was that, in my analysis, is that the Democrats won almost all Democrat candidates won every precinct on the voting machines. I know Mayor Wood did, and I'm pretty sure that the council candidates all did on the voting machines. However, it was a very strange occurrence. All my years, 30-some years being in politics, the absentee ballots normally follow about the same percentages as the votes reflected on the voting machines. In this election, where one precinct, I think Steve won by 34 votes out of 400 and some on the voting machine, he lost by 40 votes out of 70 votes by absentee. So what that would tell me is that that 2 things: either the Smith campaign has some kind of magic trick that they can get absentee people, that they only get Republican absentee people or people that will vote for Susan Smith, or that they took advantage of the new election law some way that we cannot yet determine. But, you know, maybe they just did a good job selling. but it seems very strange to me that you would have those results. And if you look at those results carefully, I think people come to the same conclusion. There is so I guess when you're talking about history, past history is one thing, but we're going through sort of a historical period now as far as a recount, because normally on the recount, now with computerized voting, the absentee ballots are going to be the crux of an issue on the recount, and they're going to be looked at very closely. The other thing that was different this election, it's the first election that we've had since the legislature passed the, some people call it the motor voter registration. It's very open registration. It opened it up, and you had to do this because of Congress passing that. And they also changed the rules on absentee balloting. It used to be that when you asked for an absentee ballot, you had to come to the courthouse to vote that absentee ballot. And this year, for the first time, they mailed ballots to people, and they could return those ballots by mail. And it was not designed for any party. That open registration was not designed for any party, be it Republican, Democrat, Communist, to influence voters. What it was designed to do was to encourage more people to vote, make it easier for them to register. It was not designed to make it easy to vote in the convenience of your home. I'm not sure it wasn't used that way in this past election. But, you know, you live and learn in things like that. If the supporters of Sue Smith did some things that along those lines, then the Democrat Party is going to have to learn how to do those same things. In this county, you know, and in another county, the Democrats could be doing it, and the Republicans are going to have to catch up. The basic, I told Wally when he asked me to do this, I said that it's sort of like a double punishment to do it 2 weeks in a row, both for me and both for the people that have to listen. But one of the things that I thought that I could talk about is in that I know Kenny has been very active in Republican state politics, is to review back when I first got started in politics. And I was under the, you know, I was young and just out of college, and first time I voted was in 1960, and Matt Welsh was elected governor. So, you know, being young and impressionable, I thought Indiana was a Democrat state. I mean, we had President Kennedy was elected, Matt Welsh was elected governor, 1964. I was working for the state government then as personnel director of the revenue department, and which was a political patronage job, and Roger Brannigan was elected governor, and I didn't, and so I'm thinking, hey, this is great, I'm a Democrat, we're always going to have the governor, and we did for 8 years, 60 to 64, 64 to 68. And then I think, what, Kenny, we didn't get another governor until Evan Bayh in 1988. So there was long dry spell of, for a Democrat, of 20 years that we had a succession of Republican governors. Wickham and then Bowen for 2 terms and Governor Orr for 2 terms. I think both parties, as I said last week, some of you were here, both parties in Indiana, we've been blessed with, for a long while, if you're a person interested in politics, is both parties, both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, have very strong party organizations, and we were a very strong party state. In 1968, during the Kennedy campaign, people were absolutely astounded that our license branches were ran not by state government, but by the party that was in control of the governor's office. In 1960 to 1968, the Democrats ran the license branches throughout the state. 68 to, I think they changed, that the change came about maybe in 1987, 1988, before Governor By went into office. The legislature changed it to where now it is ran by state government, but I think Kennedy was in charge, or appointed the person that was in charge of our license branch for a number of years. And that's the way it was in every county, and that made our party stronger because a lot of the money went into the party coffers, both the local party and the state party. I don't miss the license branches are ran by the parties. I always thought that was sort of inefficient. But I miss the fact that our parties have become weaker. We used to have 2% patronage, that if you got your job through the political process, that you paid 2% of your pay to the political party, be it Republican or Democrat. Again, I'm not saying that we should do that again, but that was a source of party funding. It has concerned me, as I'm sure it's concerned people on both sides, is the expense of campaigning and the expense of raising money. I mean, the things that you have to do to raise money. I think probably right now on the Republican side, Rex Early and Steve Goldsmith, and I guess there's some other candidates out there, but they're probably spending 70% of their campaign time not discussing the issues of state government, not studying the issues, but they're raising money for the election in 1996, as is Frank O'Bannon. You know, it's gotten so that every candidate, to know that they're going to be successful, has to build up a war chest, and I would imagine, I mean, Goldsmith right now has $2 million in his party coffers, and he hasn't even declared that he's running for governor. And he will raise $5 or $6 million. I don't know what Rex Early has raised. I know that Frank O'Bannon will be competitive money-wise with whoever the Republicans nominate. But it's really sad that a candidate doesn't have any time to study the issues, because he's out calling people, attending fundraisers, planning fundraisers, going to fundraisers. Joe Hogsett, who ran for the U.S. Senate and raised probably a couple $1 million less than his opponent, but raised some big money, told me that it took about 80% of his time, a year before he ran, to raise the money. And I mean, I think both parties have to come to some kind of solution about that. So I'm a poor fill-in for Tim. I'm going to, since Kenny gets about 2/3 of the votes for the Republican Party compared to our 1/3, I'm going to give him 2/3 of the time, so because I'm sure he has more stories than I have. Thank you.
I would concur with some of the things that Mr. Riley mentioned in regard to political fundraising. Certainly, it looks like that the big beneficiaries to fundraising is the news media. You know, if you can't get your story out by airwaves, by the printed media, you can't certainly knock on every door in Jasper County. I guess there have been some that's knocked on every door in Rensselaer. At least they said they did. But maybe that's why they won the election. Mike mentioned earlier in regard to startup in politics, I guess you try to keep a good thing going, and I can relate back. My predecessor was Jim Beaver. His predecessor was his father, Ray Beaver. His predecessor was Ed Nussbaum. His predecessor was George Warden. And his predecessor was Wendell Martin. His predecessor was Frank Felder. And for the newcomers that never heard of Frank Felder, Charlie Roberts Chevrolet Buick, that used to be Felder Chevrolet Buick. And my first introduction to politics actually was with my wife. Her dad was the county chairman, who happened to be Wendell Martin. And we were dating back in the 50s. And I went there one night and met our congressman, Charlie Howard. He happened to be in town and was getting some last-minute instruction from his county chairman before I hit the campaign trail to do some things. And I thought that was great to meet our congressman. At that time, you know, I'd only graduated in '54. I wasn't 21. I wasn't old enough to vote yet. So that was quite a challenge to be a non-voter and meet a man of the stature of Charlie Howard. So that was kind of my introduction to politics. My family was longtime Republicans. My grandfather happened to be, he said, a renegade because all the other Culps were Democrats. But he jumped the traces and went that way. And, you know, they say that athletes are born, and I guess, and politicians are made. Or maybe it's the other way around. But certainly, in this particular situation, I was born into a Republican family. I married into a Republican family. And I don't know whether that had any bearing on the father-in-law giving his daughter away or not, but certainly it didn't hurt anything. You kind of look around and hope that you are successful in what you're doing. And, you know, I guess I don't have any desire to be a statewide politician or a district-wide politician. You know, I like Jasper County. I was born here in 1936, and in fact, where I live now is just a half a mile from where I was born. And if you ever go down over here on 300 South on the Donnelly corner and take off, you'll come up over a little rise, and you'll see an old house sitting there that Merle Branson owns. And that's where I was born in 1936. And I just live a half mile across the field to the south. So that happened to be in Barclay Township. And in, well, actually, March of 1936, my father moved from there and moved to a farm in Hang Grove Township. And he lived there for about 6 months and then moved back to Berkeley. So all my life practically, except for about 3 months, has been in Berkeley Township. And whether you like history or not, they say, I've been told that Berkeley Township is the third largest township in the state of Indiana geographically. And obviously it's agriculture. And that brings up another point, you know, they can say there's 2/3 of the time here belongs to Republicans. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. We just demand equal time, not 2/3 of the time. But at any rate, being a rural agriculture county, you know, that kind of goes hand in hand with a philosophy of conservatism. And, you know, you talk about politicians around locally, federal candidates, state candidates, and, well, for instance, you mentioned Rex Early and Steve Goldsmith. And obviously, from where I come from, people say, well, Steve Goldsmith's too liberal. So it's not the fact whether you're Republican or whether you're Democrat, it's if you're liberal or conservative. And so you kind of get the hat to wear that you are a conservative Republican. And then you come with the Southern Democrats to say, well, you know, traditionally they're Democrat, but they're conservative and they think like Republicans. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. You know, Jasper County is very unique in the fact that, you know, we're agriculture. We're the third largest county in the state of Indiana. And there's a lot of third, fourth generation people in this county that think this is the greatest place in the world to live. And I would concur with that. And, you know, my involvement, I don't go for anything great. I don't want any glamour and glory, just to make Jasper County a wonderful place to live and to raise families and be a conservative county and not go around and do a lot of things that's going to cause the taxpayers a lot of money. And certainly, that kind of goes along with filling the ticket with people that think like you do. And once in a while, there's some of them that, you know, are elected office that they want to spend money for this, they want to spend money for that, and they've never had that opportunity before. I've not either, but I know one thing: if you have to work for your money, you have to think about how you're going to spend it. And Dorothy Lee told me when I first got involved in the county council, she said, just remember one thing, that when you're spending those dollars, spend them like they're yours. And if you think it's a good deal, it probably is. If you think it's a bad deal, it probably is a bad deal. And I've always remembered that. And I served on the county council, and just kind of one of those deals that Jim Beaver, the county chairman, and I went and talked to him one day and said, Jim, I said, my first experience in public office wasn't too gratifying. I lived in South Berkeley Township, or South Berkeley precinct in Berkeley Township, and Charlie Florence was a precinct committeeman there. He came up to me one day and he said, I'd like for you to work on the election board. I said, fine, I can do that. He said, I want you to be sheriff. So we sat outside of Berkeley School on a cold November day, and heater didn't work very good on our truck, but nevertheless we kept all the bad people away, let the good people go in and vote, and if their name was on the list, obviously, and never had any problems. But after it was over with, Charlie said, you know, he said, I've been around a long time. He said, some of these days, he said, I'm going to give up this precinct committeeman job. He said, I'd like you to run for that. Well, I said, I might consider that. I said, when do you think you might do that, Charlie? Well, he said, I don't know. He said, I'll let you know when I do. Well, at that particular time, precinct committeemen were elected every 2 years. So the next time of the election, I just went in the courthouse and I filed for precinct committee in South Berkeley Township. Charlie never said anything. Figured that's the thing to do. So by golly, come out in the paper, Charlie Florence, competition for precinct committeeman. Charlie saw me on the road and said, I wasn't ready to give that up yet. I said, well, Charlie, I said, you know, you kind of indicated that maybe you might be giving it up, so I thought this is a good time to try it. Well, I said, I'm going to challenge you. He said, we're going to have a race. I said, fine. I said, you know, I'll take my lumps. Well, it ended up I got beat 2-1. And I think I got 26 votes, and I think he got 51 or 52. But the 26 votes I got were the people I went and talked to. Told them I was running for precinct committeeman. I'd like to have your support. So I learned my lesson out of that. Well, in the meantime, Charlie died. So I thought, well, I got her made now. I can run again and won't have any contest. Well, sure enough, that's the way it turned out. But had I not challenged Charlie and waited till the time came, somebody else might have jumped in there, and maybe I wouldn't have gotten involved. But after being a precinct committeeman, talked to Jim Beaver about the do's and don'ts of politics and kind of interested in being in county government, give a little something back to the community. Why, he said, you know, if you want to run for county council, he said, you probably could get my support and some other people around if you want to talk to them. I said, fine, do that. And that particular time when that was going on, they elected all 7 councilmen at the same time. So you had 3 at large and 4 district council people all elected at the same time, which wasn't good for county government. I mean, you could possibly throw all 7 out and get 7 people in there that didn't really know what was going on. So that particular election, they changed it. The 4 district guys were elected for a 4-year term, and the at-large council people were elected for a 2-year term. So that means you're going to have to run countywide, and then 2 years later do it again. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to run countywide. So I got my name on the ballot. There were 5 fellows in the race and elected 3. I was one of the 3. So I thought, well, boy, you know, this isn't too bad, and kind of enjoyed it. And obviously when you go to the county council in the fall of the year, you know, everybody's submitting their budgets, and you get to review everybody's budget. And believe it or not, you know, being on the county council is a little more powerful than being president on some things, because you have line item veto. And they didn't have that at that time. So anything in that line, you know, the prosecutor, whatever, judge, whatever, put in there, you could exit out, make them be responsible for telling you why they had it in there. And obviously, you know, there's some advantage to being a judge because they have the mandating power, and you can throw it all out, but they can come back and put it all in and more besides, and anything you can do about it. But that's the way the law is written, so we go by the law. And after serving on the county council for a few years and seeing that was quite a challenge, serving with guys like Roy Frieden, John Konoski, and there's some old timers on there that had kind of been around and really knew the ropes and knew what they're looking for, you know. I thought that was something that very beneficial, and I appreciated their knowledge. And I was been elected for a 4-year term, and Harold Evers had been elected for a 4-year term also. We were on the same cycle as commissioner. And oh, way back when, there was a delegation came to me and asked me to run for commissioner. And I said, no, I didn't think I wanted to run for commissioner. And that Neil Bott was the commissioner at that time. And they said, well, Neil's getting kind of old, and he's been around a long time, and needs some new blood. I said, well, I don't think I'm your man. And many of you probably know Bill Leopold, and Bill Leopold was a good friend of mine and kind of been around politics for a long time. And I saw him in town one day, and I said, Bill, I said, there's a delegation of people been calling me up every day, want me to run for commissioner. He said, what'd you tell them? I said, I haven't told them anything yet, but I didn't think I was interested. He said, well, kind of think about this a little bit. He said, if they're calling you up and asking you to run, he said, they've probably got an axe to grind with the present office holder, the incumbent. And he said, they're not really for you, but they're against the other guy. And so I got to digging around in there, you know, and talked to some of these guys, and I said, no, what's wrong with old Neil? Well, I had this particular problem, and they didn't take care of it for me. Yeah, I said, had a chuck hole out in my mailbox. Every day you go up and get the mail, I have to walk around it. I said, you know, we need a little stone in that, Neil. Never got it. So what Bill Leopold said was exactly right. They were really for me, but they were against Neil. So I followed Bill's advice. I didn't run for commissioner. But whenever it came around and Harold Evers had been elected and served about 3 months and was stricken and ultimately died, they had another delegation of people that had come around and said, you know, you got to consider moving from council to commissioner. And I said, well, I don't know. I said, that takes a lot of extra time. I said, you know, they meet regularly, have a lot of in-between times when they have to do things and run here and run there. And I said, you know, I'm trying to raise a family and farm and got a living to make. And, oh, that's no problem. We can talk on telephone. You know, we can take care of all these little necessities on telephone. No problem. So I thought, well, after talking to some people, getting encouragement, well, I'd go ahead and file. Well, there was 4 other people who got talked the same thing. So we had another contest. But that was at a caucus. Being 27 precincts in the county, why there was going to be 27 precinct committeemen or their alternates that would do the voting. So I went around and visited with all those people and told them that I'd kind of considered running for commissioner and like to have their support. And so we had a caucus, and I won that election through the precinct organization. And just this last election, which was 4 years ago, was actually the first time, or 3 years ago. 2 years ago, I guess we have another election in '96, which will take off in '97, so we're that far away from being a full term. Was actually the first time I ran for county commissioner as an office of my own, not somebody else's fill-in. But as you look around Jasper County, you know, you see a lot of things going on. I'm not sure exactly what the assessed valuation of Jasper County is. It's somewhere from $350 to $360 million. And that's a lot of valuation. That's the biggest business in the county. And certainly it takes a lot of people doing a lot of things to get the job done and get it done in a fashion to where, you know, you've got an operating balance, you've got some rainy day money set aside, and some things you can do once in a while and not have to raise taxes. And I think one of the prime examples of that is this solid waste district that we're involved in, the 6 county solid waste district, of which there's 6 counties: Jasper, Newton, Benton, White, Pulaski, and Carroll. And again, you know, this was a mandate put on us by the state that we had to function. And we had a 6 county district. And there's a lot, I think there's 47 or 48, maybe 50 some single county districts throughout the state that are operating, and probably they're operating on tax dollars. And so far, our district is operating on tipping fees only. And the way the thing is growing over there, it's a big, big metropolis of trash that's dumped on another county. A lot of it, of course, is probably 75 or 80% of it is coming from even out of state. And those kind of things and those kind of situations, you know, kind of make me feel like that I'm doing something helpful to the whole county if you can control those kind of things. And not that we want to dump our trash on somebody else, but to make sure that it's not our taxpayers' dollars that are going into that landfill. Review a little bit on the county offices. I'm sure everybody's aware of all the offices in the courthouse, and probably there's some things about it that I don't know. Obviously, you know, there's the surveyor, who is an unlimited term office holder, commissioners, of course, council members, prosecutors, judges, the assessor, and I think I said surveyor, but at any rate, those are all 4-year terms, and they're set by statute that they can succeed themselves as many times as they can get elected. But the office holders that are handling dollars, like your clerk, the recorder, the treasurer, the auditor, seems like there's one other one. Sheriff, right, are limited terms where they can only serve 8 out of 12 years. And certainly, you know, there's been a lot of movement in the past to, especially on the sheriff's side, the Sheriff's Association, to make it unlimited terms. But I can remember 2 different times that's been tried, and it always fails. And why that is, I have no idea, but certainly it's a situation that does prevail. And I guess maybe, you know, if you get a good sheriff and he wants to run 4 years later, well, he can do so if he can get elected. But we found out in the last sheriff's election that wasn't true in Jasper County. And for some unknown reason, state policemen always run good races. A friend of mine was over in Logansport, and he was recruiting a state trooper that had just retired for sheriff. And he said, you know, I think this is not a real strong Republican county, but I think he can get elected. So he convinced the guy to run, and he ran the primary and the contested primary, and he won, and ran in the fall and led the ticket. And 4 years later, he didn't have a primary. Nobody challenged him in the fall. He led the ticket again. He laid out 2 years, he ran for mayor of Logansport. He got killed. Just didn't get any votes at all. But I guess the fact that the law enforcement agencies, you know, everybody trusts the lawmen and feels safe, and consequently they make good candidates, and they make good sheriffs. And Jim Wallace, well, I suppose probably is still learning like any of the rest of us are, but he's a heck of a good sheriff, and he's kind of a people's person and understands the people and understands the system. But at any rate, I guess I could go on and reminisce about some of my experiences in politics. I told Wally, I said, I need a little guidance on what to do, and he said, well, just kind of tell about some of your experiences. And I said, well, most of my experiences have been local, except for the fact that 4 years ago I was honored to be a delegate at the National Convention, which kind of opened my eyes the way the big timers roll and play games and the like, but I'm still a little country guy from here in Jasper County, and I want to remain that way. And you talk about getting out early at a meeting today, Wally. I don't know whether you can stand 2 meetings or not, but is there any questions, or are there any questions anybody has up to this point before maybe we take a break? Because it is about break time, I understand. Okay.
Would you give that advice that Dorothy Lee gave you to just anybody today? Spend the money like it's your own?
Absolutely. You betcha. That's very, very important. You know, and I think one of the most important positions in this county, or any other county, is a school board person. You know, with 70 cents or out of our tax dollars, 70% of our tax dollars. I mean, we got a couple of school board members here. I think I can say this without reservation, that, you know, those people are responsible for more dollars than your elected county officials are. Because, I mean, we get 28 or 29 cents to divide up with the welfare and what have you. And, you know, here's where the bulk of our money's going, and we need to really be conscious about the people that are put on school boards to protect our tax base. Because, you know, there's some of them that aren't too careful with it. And we're one of the I guess probably in the middle of the road, sort of 70%. There are some that's, I think maybe KV's like 73. Jared, you know that for a fact?
No, what?
73% of our tax dollars go for education in your corporation?
I don't know, King. I asked that question at the board meeting, and they told, the only number that I know is that, like, I think that 69% comes from NITSCO. Out of the dollars that they get, 69% of that comes from that, you know, the generating plant.
Right,
That's the only thing that I've ever
Right,
asked.
right. Well, that's probably true, and it could be down to 69% as a whole, but I think it's a little higher than that.
Well, when you're saying that, Kenny, you're talking about property tax.
Property tax,
dollars.
right.
You're not talking about all our tax dollars. I mean, all our state tax dollars. You're
I'm just talking about local.
Property.
Right, just
local
Jasper County, you bet,
property
you
tax.
bet, you bet. But still, that's a big figure, you know, the amount of school teachers there are and bus drivers, you know, it takes a lot of money for education. And I was visiting with a fellow commissioner from another state one time, and I think about 50 or 52% of their tax dollars went for education. He said, gosh, he said, you guys are in Indiana are really giving them a heck of an education because of the extra percentages there. And I said, well, that's just what it costs to operate the school system, and, you know, that's what it takes. But at any rate, that's good advice for anybody, especially school board members, because they're gonna have a lot more money than we do.
That's it, that they agree with your philosophy about they would pinch the penny. I guess, I had reservations when I heard that comment, because I don't know that sometimes you can always completely know how someone will control money. They may not always control according to your philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's perhaps what she meant, conservative.
Right, that's exactly right. You bet, you bet. Well, you know, for a guy that goes out here and buys a used car and drives it all the time, you'd think when he got to be a public official that he would still have the philosophy of driving used cars, in spite of the fact that it is his money. He forgets that. So let's drive a new car that's 2 or 3 models better than the one I'm driving. And you know, I fail to see that that is good for the taxpayers of the county. And not that if a guy drives a Cadillac, that everybody in the county ought to drive Cadillacs, but, you know, just kind of keep that in perspective of what you're used to working with yourself and work the same angle for the county government. And, you know, Jasper County is probably, dollars-wise, one of the richer counties around this area. You know, I can name a couple counties that's not too far away that in 1994 had to bond the county to make their December payroll. And I think that's pretty scary. And I hope it never comes to that in this county. And, you know, whether that's conservative thinking, whether it's good management, whether it's just because you've got a rich county, you know, I can't give you all the answer for that, but, you know, time tells me that due to the conservatism that's happened years previous, it's one of those little pots that just keeps building, and everybody does their share as a conservative saying.
Let me ask you this, Ken, have you ever, since you've been on either the county council or county commissioners, kept so much money back that it was Jasper County money, that you had a surplus that you had to turn into the state of Indiana?
No,
That's never happened.
not that I'm aware of.
What do you do when you have a surplus? Where do you put it?
Well, we try to earmark it for a special fund that would be coming up. For instance, I mean, there's no secret about it. It's public knowledge. There's a solid waste fund in Jasper County. In our budget, there's $3 million in it. When we started out, there was $5 million in it. But back when interest rates were high, people were paying 21% interest, they were paying 15, 16% for CDs. Jasper County had some money to invest. And the people invested it and lived on interest. Really. I mean, there was a lot of interest coming in that would put near pay the bill for the county. I'm sure there's everybody in this room would understand that the county highway department is not ran on property tax dollars. Is everybody aware of that? Not aware of that. You know, and that's unfortunate because of the fact that there's numerous people throughout Jasper County that I mentioned earlier are 3rd or 4th generation people that have lived in that same road on that same property as their fathers and their grandfathers or maybe their great-grandfathers. And the road is gravel. It's a good gravel road. Since they've lived there for 4 generations, why in the heck isn't that road blacktopped? You might go a mile this way and a mile that way and be one house, but they've lived there for 4 generations, they paid all this property tax, and they don't have a blacktop road. And you say, well, are you aware that just the gas tax dollars provide the revenue for the highway department? I mean, we're talking about the whole highway budget. All the drivers, the trucks, the drag tractors, the stone, the oil, all the machinery, everything is paid out of highway dollars. No, they didn't know that. They thought that because they had their property tax, you know, and they screamed because they pay so much property tax and had gravel roads. I say, well, if you've got 4 kids, get them all a car, let them buy a lot of gas, go see Dick Wiseman, he'll sell them to you, and burn up the roads. It'll create more dollars for you. But the formula is the assessed valuation, the number of registered vehicles, and the miles of roads determine how much tax dollars you're going to get. And there's about 940 some miles or 60 some miles of road in Jasper County. And obviously, that is a real problem in the spring of the year. And you go out and build a nice road, farmer's got 30 or 40,000 bushel of corn to deliver by March 1st, and it's been cold all up through January. The elevator was full, he didn't want to take his corn there and dump it on the ground. So he's going to start in about the 20th of February and get that corn delivered by March 1st. Well, about the 15th, it starts warming up. Roads break up. Major problems. And we've had a couple farmers that have turned in a neighbor for hauling grain on a nice new road. They said, hey, you know, wait till the frost goes out, deliver it somewhere else or whatever. And that's a real problem. I mean, you know, that's a guy's livelihood. And, you know, how do you treat those people? You don't want to make them all mad at you. You want to keep at least 51% on your side. But, you know, the laws are the laws, and everybody has to abide by them. And there were some citations issued, and in fact, one guy I think had about a $300 fine. But that word got around pretty fast. So those are some of the little problems that are confronted with the daily routine. Certainly, you know, in our highway department out here, Rich Arnold is the highway superintendent, and for the most part calls all the shots. You know, we might suggest, people might call up and say they need this done or that done, and turn it over to Rich, and says, okay, Rich, you know, we kind of need to get this problem done, and then he's aware of it, he takes care of it. And, you know, I guess it'd be my dream if every road in Jasper County could be blacktopped. We've had some neighboring counties to the east of us that turned some gravel roads, or blacktop roads, back to gravel roads because they couldn't maintain them. And that's, you know, that situation, the mayor could tell us about putting down blacktop. I mean, how expensive it is, go around the block and start laying 2 or 3 miles of that down. I think it's very, very expensive, and, you know, a few $100,000 doesn't go too far. So, obviously, if you're trying to keep the road system in a good state of repair, you're going to have to maintain some already existing roads. And when you do that, that takes money away from building new roads. And I don't think probably in 1995 that Jasper County is going to build, well, maybe 2 miles of new road. And the rest of it's going to be overlay. That's on existing roads that needed very serious attention. And used to be a fellow at the highway department who no longer is even a resident of this county. He's at the Brotherhood above. That was superintendent of the highway, and, you know, he said if there was a Democrat living on the road, they didn't need anything. And that's true. That actually, I mean, that was his philosophy, and that's, you know, but I don't believe that way. You know, I think everybody, if there's a need for it, let's do it, regardless of politics, because I believe when you put your name on the ballot, you declare yourself as a Republican or Democrat. And that's for the primary election. And when you walk out of there, you're a citizen of this county, and you're trying your best to support the whole organization of everybody in the county and treat everybody fairly. You know, I really believe one man, one vote is the way to go. And I agree with Mike also on the two-party system. You know, certainly, you know, we don't want to be one-sided all the time. And the fact that, you know, he says 2/3 of Jasper County is all Republican, you know, I like that, but I haven't asked those people to be Republicans. It's just the fact that, you know, when you go in to register at the clerk's office, you register to vote. You do not register by party. And there are states around where, I think Illinois, where you do register by party. So you have an opportunity to make your own choice depending on the candidates. Tim?
Let me change the subject for just a second. What advice would you give to some younger, inexperienced folks that are trying to get into the party process on either side?
Well, I guess my advice would be to get acquainted with a office holder or a to-be office holder, somebody that's going to run for public office, and tell them you'd like to help them out, either on a door-to-door campaign or put up yard signs, and maybe give them a spot on election board that they can come in and work election day as a poll watcher, as a precinct worker, or a get out to vote sort of a person. And there's lots of opportunities. I know candidates welcome those kind of people. Well, is it break time yet?
Well,
Mr. Hoover had a question back here.
those 960 miles of road in Jasper County, does that include the state highways too, Kenny, or?
No, that's just county highways. That's just county roads.
Okay, now how many miles of that is paid? Of the 960, what? how many?
Probably around 500.
A little over half.
I haven't seen those figures lately. Yeah, that's about right. And unfortunately, you know, this center part of Jasper County is the 2nd district. We've got the most miles and the least blacktop. And I growl about that every time we meet with our fellow commissioners and start asking, you know, where we're going to build roads at. I say, let's build them in the 2nd district. We've been slighted too long. But it kind of goes back, Mike, to that old guy on the highway department didn't want to give the Democrats anything. You know, if you got a guy on each end that said, well, I'll take it, boy, they got it. And it takes a long time to catch up, especially when you're behind to start with.
Well, let me go on for a minute. Is that okay?
Sure, go right ahead.
I know it's break time, but we don't have, we haven't had our speakers. Let me respond to 2 or 3 things you said, and maybe our school board member wants to respond to the responsibility of being on the school board. I preach, if you want to be prosperous in the future, you need to invest. You need to invest in education. You need to invest in infrastructure, plant and equipment, research and development. And the most important one of those investments is education. So a school board member does need to watch money. We do spend a lot of money. But you also have to keep in mind that for the future prosperity, you need to invest in education. Now, how you spend that money is a real chore. And it isn't just spending the money, it's answering the suits that are filed these days. It's getting buildings ready for handicap. It's getting teachers for special ed. It's a whole different ballgame than it used to be. It really is a lot different, and you get bogged down in things that you wouldn't think of. But I don't. Do you want to respond at all?
Well, I mean, and you talk about mandates coming from the state. I mean, they're constantly coming. And even more, they're not unfunded. You know that too, Natalie, don't you? I mean, it's amazing with our special ed, what we have had to, we had to add a teacher this year just for special ed. You know, that area of education is, around here is growing by leaps and bounds. For a while, we didn't hardly have any, and now we, we're flourishing. And I think KV's got a lot too, and we send a lot of people up to KV, and they send down, it's a cooperative thing that we all do, but the transportation, everything, the cost is just tremendous anymore of doing that. I mean, I understand what you're saying about the money, but yet, I agree with Wally too, the investment in the kids is what is your and my future.
Great.
How about a teacher? Does she want to respond to school board members?
Oh, I don't know. I
You
so
won't know the
often
answer.
have to consider myself a parent first of 4 children and a taxpayer, someone who, adds to the pool. So I do have concerns, and I think I feel often that I cannot speak out about my concerns because I am a teacher, and it will always get reflected back to the fact that I'm looking at it more as a teacher's point of view. And so I remain silent on a lot of issues.
Well, I'd like to respond to maybe probably the difference between some of the philosophies of Mr. Culp and his party and the philosophies of myself. And I think people, and I have always called myself liberal, although it's probably considered a dirty word here. But, you can be fiscally conservative, and you can spend money as if it's your own. But you have to keep in mind that there's people that are a lot poorer than probably the majority of the people on county government or city government or anything else. In that I've always felt the government has a duty to take care of the less fortunate and to help them. And so if that means that I'm gonna have to spend a little bit more money to help someone who's down at the bottom, then I'm for spending that money. And I would do, and I could abide by his philosophy if his philosophy is one that you spend like you personally would spend. And I feel there's a duty for the more fortunate to help the less fortunate, and I would be willing personally to spend that money. I'd also be willing to spend it governmentally. I think that we've seen in the Congress that they're going after Medicaid and Medicare, the Republicans, and that they're taking monies away from the poor, but yet they're going to fund a $245 billion tax cut. Now, that's where Mr. Culp and I philosophically would come to parting of the way.
Let's continue that when we end here, but I think when we end, we'll adjourn for the evening. But I want to say 1 or 2 other things. I said infrastructure and plant and equipment and research and development, education. I think the current city administration has been a really good example, and I'm not choosing parties here, but the infrastructure they have invested in the last 4 years is amazing. The results are, I think, new plants and equipment in the community. Those are investments for prosperity in the future. The meeting this afternoon that you missed was one on education, really. There's a new trend called from welfare to work. And the state has mandated that people be on welfare for 2 years, and within that 2 years, they find a job and go to work. That's easy to say and hard to do. But each county has been told to come up with a plan to do that, to help people from welfare into work. And they set a calendar that has to be followed pretty closely because it's a fast track. I understand White County is not even going to turn one in. They got lost in the shuffle. Ken is elected local official for the 6th County Workforce Development Service Delivery Area. And we probably have the outstanding organization in the state, if one of the outstanding organizations in the country, in fact, been recognized nationally. But because of them, I think we have kept on the calendar. We have a plan. That's what we were finalizing this afternoon. It's going to go to the region, to a meeting, and then to the state for the General Assembly in January to finalize what the plan will be to get people from welfare to work. And that will include education. It will include other things like transportation, medicine, babysitting, whatever it takes. And we all know that it isn't going to work 100%. If it works 30 or 40%, it'll be a good investment. But anyway, I mention it because it is investment in education again. And
Wally, where was that meeting held?
at the, what do we call that building? Senior Citizens
Community Center.
Community Center. Jerry, what about the Luger attendance possibility?
He's, right now, Luger is supposed to be at St. Joseph's College at 12:15 and speak from 12:15 to 1 o'clock.
November 16th?
November the 16th. Now, how he's gonna do that is beyond me, because he's supposed to get to Chicago at 11:30. And, you know, chartering down here, and we've got, you know, because we've got half the schools, we've got 16 schools, I think, that are gonna be there, about 1,300 kids. And half the schools in number are on fast time, and half of them are on Rensselaer time. So, you know, we've done the work to figure this all out, and they got to leave. Some have got to leave at about 1 o'clock. And so I keep telling his people, you know, they're saying, we're gonna be all right. And I told them, I said, now I want to tell you something now, these school buses are gonna move at 1 o'clock. And they're gonna go back to Winamac, and they're gonna go back to North Judson, and so forth and so on. I don't know if they really understand that yet or not, but I suppose about 1 o'clock on next Thursday,
They will.
they'll understand. See, and I just hope he gets here and everything's fine now.
He won't.
Well, I'm
None
afraid
of
of that
those
too,
guys
Mike.
are ever on time. I mean, and that is bipartisan.
Well, I'm afraid of that too, that's
Democrat or
been my experience, and I keep telling him, and
Yeah, we won't be there on time.
I got a
Steve?
question. I've just gotten enlightened tonight on a couple of things, especially about recycling and budgetary amounts and monies. Could you explain that to me, how the county has $3 million? Or is that the county, the 6th county organization?
No, that's just Jasper County.
You have $3 million. Or is that earmarked for recycling, or what? I guess I misunderstood.
Yeah, that's what's earmarked for it. It's a line item. It's rainy day money. Like I said, it started out at $5 million.
Well, you two want to visit some more after we adjourn? Hey, one other thing I want to say, what Jerry is saying is that if you want to go hear Senator Lugar, you can do that in place of one of the evening classes. They will count as an evening class. Okay, now, let's adjourn.
Oh, okay. No, I would like to continue that discussion with Kenny.
Sure.
And anybody who wants to listen, stand around, but there are refreshments.
Well, back to this education thing, I in no way was belittling education.
Oh, I didn't take it that way.
No, I just want to understand. I mean, it's very important, and I think it's very important to have leadership like yourself and Gene in there to make sure that we get quality education.
No, I didn't take it that way. I just